Hi,
Did we get it?
I think so. Are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you see me?
Yes.
We did it.
I'm a little late getting on. I'm trying to get my 14-year-old dog to go to the bathroom and I'm walking him around and he didn't want to go.
Well, he wants what he wants.
Yeah.
He was just really excited.
Yeah. I have to show him on screen every time because he's the cutest thing ever. How's
Yeah.
your dog?
He's good. He is not a lap dog.
Hmm.
So if I brought him over here, he wouldn't be able to come here. Sorry.
Um, well, I hope all the photos I shared of your work on Bread and Salt were okay. I realized, you know, it's hard to show your work. I hope everybody can go and visit your website, which is melissawalterart.com. Is that what it is?
Mm-hmm.
You have a really great website. I was thinking maybe we could show some photos from that. I have an iPad here. We can try it. I don't know what you would think of that or if you just want to talk. But it looks like you also have work behind you. Maybe we can look at some of that stuff.
Yeah, I actually hung some stuff. I don't normally hang my work in the studio, just because I prefer to not have to dust it and
Right.
clean it. And I like to be able to okay, you guys are going into the next show and get it in the car and go and not have to pull it all down. But
Right.
kind of nice having it up, actually. It's nice to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, you have a great studio at home, and I like having my work up at my studio, but not so much in my house. But I mean, I'm actually transitioning my studio to my house, so I'll have stuff in my studio too. It's good to have it in the studio for sure.
Yeah, I guess it's just like a little reminder of what it is that you're doing, like why you're doing it. And then sort of, because most of the time, I complete a work, I get it framed, and then I put it away and work on the next thing, like the only pieces I really have up are the bigger ones that I just don't have space to kind of stash it in a corner or something. So,
Right. Uh,
but yeah.
I just want to say a few things just before we get started. It's so easy to just jump into it, but so we got to keep it to an hour. I don't know. I'm going to try and keep track, but it's better that we keep it just under an hour. It's 1:04 right now.
Oh, you give Michael an hour and a half and I only get an hour?
I
Kidding.
feel like we could probably delete the back end of that conversation. It's hard to upload this stuff too. It takes hours to do all that whole YouTube thing. Anyways, Saturday, Ponca, we're going to do his home studio tour with Ponca too. And it'll be a different kind of conversation. We're doing a book with Ponca, so there's going to be a really long extended conversation that I did with Ponca in that book. So we're going to keep it a little bit short. So that's tomorrow, Saturday. Lee Levy's on the 31st, Tuesday. We're not doing interviews Sunday or Monday. Andrew Alcacid's April 1st, and then Jim Brown. And we have other people that we're waiting to confirm and dates and stuff like that. So
I'm glad you guys
yeah.
are doing it. And I appreciate that you asked me to do it too. That's rude.
Yeah, you were, I mean, I don't know how we could start talking about all this stuff, but you did the residency program at Bread and Salt pretty early on.
Yeah.
I think it was after Jason Sherry. Jason Sherry was one of our kind of first programmed artist in residence that we had.
Well,
I
you
think
were technically the first artist in residence.
I was, but it was before there was a program. So the program, the whole thing kind of evolved, and yeah, I was able to have a studio there for a really long time. And then it was Jason Sherry, and then it was you, and then God, refresh my memory. It was Andrew.
Yeah, I think it was Andrew after me.
And then Daniel Barron Corrales. But before we get all into that, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, is because you've been part of Bread and Salt since the earlier beginnings of the programming there. So, and I know your practice has evolved so much since I met you, but
yeah, big time.
yeah, I
I'll
like to hear
figure it out.
I like to hear the whole story too. I know we got into this kind of conversation yesterday with Michael, and um, I think it's important to hear all the information. And I've had lots of conversations with you over the years about, you know, your background and stuff. And I know you're from New York State. Is that right? Or where are you originally from?
I'm from Long Island. I was born in Rhode Island, but I grew up in Long Island. But then moved out here in 2001, pretty much. But I don't know. Do you want to start from the beginning? Because I've actually been thinking about that kind of stuff the past few days. You know, because we always talk about, like, you know, how'd you get on this path, you know, as an artist, and where things came from. And it surprisingly brought up like a bunch of memories for me that I completely forgot about.
Yeah.
And yeah, like it was funny. A couple days ago, my folks figured out how to use Skype for the first time. So they gave me a tour of their new home in Florida that I haven't been to yet. And so of course my mom's like showing me like all the art, like her needlepoint. She does a lot of needlepoint stuff, and like some old stuff that I had done in college and way back before that. And then she like briefly like flashed on these Chagall prints that she had in the house. And it totally reminded me that that was probably one of the real like first artists that I knew about was Chagall. And at that point I was, you know, doing art a lot. You know, I had been doing art like as a kid forever. You know, it just sort of was the thing that I latched onto, and that my parents really encouraged too, which was awesome. And I remember doing this painting, and I think it might have been for the bat mitzvah when I was 12, of sort of this Chagall ripoff, you know, like little kid Chagall ripoff. But it kind of made me realize that it was sort of like the surreal that I was the most interested in as a kid, you know. And definitely when I found Dolly, you know, like I went nuts for him. And, you know, I was trying to think about this, like, why, you know, because I've always been that way, you know, going to art museums, I always gravitated towards, you know, the weirder work, you know. I would go into the rooms that were very like traditional and lots of wood walls, and there'd be, you know, these beautiful landscapes and countrysides, but I would kind of blow through it kind of quickly. I mean, I still do that to some degree. I mean, I love to see technique and get up close to that kind of work, especially when you're thinking like romantic eras and you're looking at lace materials. Like that always just blows my mind. But even when I was young, I just really loved it when I saw artists doing abstracted work that wasn't something that you could just see in nature, and you couldn't, you know, like just walk up to and say, oh, that's, you know, a bowl of fruit on a table, you know. And it could be a bowl of fruit on the table, but it was done, you know, like Picasso just did things in this, you know, brand new way. And I don't know, you know, so thinking about this talk and thinking about all those things, I like sort of realized like abstraction has always been sort of something that I gravitated towards.
Huh.
You know?
So were you going into Manhattan or something to go to museums and things growing up in Long Island? Is that like a trek? I mean, I guess geographically, you know, I'm not so familiar, but.
Yeah, that was stuff that, you know, my folks did for us. We went in the city. We would go in the city a lot to like see shows. My mom is really into like musicals, and there's this spot in Times Square that you can go and get really cheap tickets the day of. So if you don't care what show you're going to, if you're not trying to see something very specific, you can go and get like, you know, what the leftover tickets, and then sort of see this sort of maybe side, not as popular show, but still really cool stuff. So it was a lot of theater when I was young, but then also museums, you know, Natural History Museum also, and, you know, but it was even natural history museums. I would still to this day, I mean, I enjoy them, but I also find them a little, like, I blow through them a little faster. Whereas like modern art museums, I have a tendency to take my time and really like gravitate towards, just because I love that the creativity of just pulling something out of imagination that happens in those spaces.
Did you go to an arts high school or anything like that? Or I vaguely remember hearing you talk about that in the past, but.
Yeah, I did a lot of art schooling. Like I went to art camps when I was younger. A lot of the times, did a lot of creative art camps and did a lot of painting. I wish I had like all the art that I created when I was a kid, but of course, you know, that just disappeared over time. But yeah, when I was in my junior year of high school, I applied for this program. It's part of the BOST program. And it's sort of like, it was adjacent to the programs. You could do like an automotive program. And so for half the day of school, you could leave, you know, your regular high school and then go to these programs. And so I went to this art one, and it was everything. It was photography, digital work, painting, drawing. We even had live nude models in high school, which was pretty crazy. But it definitely gave me a little bit of a leg up when I got into college, because that was sort of the first time that a lot of the students experienced that. And I just rolled myself right up to the front, and I'm like, all right, let's get in this. You know? And everybody else is a little more timid in that process. But, you know.
I know you have such a big graphic design background too. Did you have like a first, what was your first introduction to that? I mean, I guess you probably saw the professional aspect of graphic design in a digital realm kind of develop, right? Or what, you know, you've probably seen a lot because you've been doing it for a while.
Yeah, I've been doing it for a long time. So I was going to the University of Rhode Island in the 90s. And while I was going to the University of Rhode Island, I was in their art program, and they had a digital art program, but it wasn't a very robust graphic design program, but I really gravitated towards it. And I think part of the reason why I gravitated towards it, because I was also really into rave culture, basically a raver back in the 90s. And one thing that I loved about the culture, beyond, you know, the style and the dance and the, you know, hanging out and all the other extracurricular activities of it, I really loved the flyers. You know, I loved the art that was coming out of that time in particular. And I just really wanted to do that, you know? And so even though our digital art program in our school was kind of fairly new, we had a big like computer lab, but I just wound up taking the same classes over and over again. Thankfully, they were great and they let me do that. And so I kind of taught myself graphic design in the beginning. I definitely I learned what I could from the professor at the time, but like I really pushed it as much as I could. And then also what wound up happening was, because I was one of the only students that really done that in the art program. I mean, everybody else was being way more traditional than I was as far as the arts go. Other departments in the school started reaching out to me to do like flyers for them, for promoting events and, you know, that kind of stuff. And that was sort of like the beginnings of my graphic design career, you know. But then while I was there, I also wound up getting asked to be part of an internship for the Rhode Island, I never get it right, I'll probably get it wrong, the Rhode Island Health Partnership, maybe, or something like that, where they were doing a program about the dangers of ticks, and they needed a graphic designer to come in, or an art graphic artist to come in and design this interactive DVD about ticks. It was very, it was fun. But the great thing about that experience is that it sort of led me down like a further path, because I wound up meeting another woman that we were in the same year together. And her name is Kim Cowell, and when she graduated, she was in computer science. And when she graduated, she moved on to NASA. And she moved on to a division of NASA called the Chandra X-ray Observatory. And this was a space-based telescope that hadn't launched yet. They were in the process of building it, and it was just about to be launched. And they realized they're going to start needing to do some promotional materials about what kind of science was going to be, studied with this new telescope. And so she reached out to me to create some new imagery for them. And sort of that also led me down this like whole other path of design and science illustration that I really, I had no idea. I wasn't into astronomy. I tried to take an astronomy class, but it was at night, like 8 a.m. on a Friday. And so I dropped it very quickly in my freshman year. Yeah.
Were you thinking of moving west, or was there a plan after college, or what was the whole idea after you were finishing school, or what were you thinking was going to happen?
Well, did I start coming out? No, I think I had come out to San Diego a couple of times at that point, but, and I really loved it because I had a friend from high school that moved out here, that was from here and moved back here. But I was sort of on this path, like this new graphic design path, so even before the NASA gig sort of went like full time, after I graduated, I went into the graphic design field and started working I worked for a print design firm, a very small one, for about a year and a half. And then I moved on to a web design firm after that. And I thought I was going to stay in New York and keep doing that. But then I think the third time or the fourth time I came out here to visit my friend, I was sort of like, I love it out here. I just want to come out here. So there wasn't like any like specific job or thing. It was just the web design sort of job kind of blew up. They spent too much money and, whatever, and went under. And so I was sort of like, okay, well, screw it, let's go. And I just,
and that was
no job. I had no place to live.
You ended up in San Diego or Venice?
Yeah. No, I wound up in San Diego first. Yeah. And I, no job, no real permanent spot to live or anything. And tried to get a graphic design job for a while, but that wasn't really working very well. I actually worked at the Children's Museum for a very short period of time at their front desk.
Wow.
And helped them with some events and stuff, because I had been part of sort of this rave culture, and I had a number of friends that were throwing massive raves, so I understood promotion and marketing for events. So I was kind of helping with that for a little while. But then the NASA gig, fortuitously, went full time, which was, I'm really grateful for, because it went full time with me working from home. And this was in 2002. That wasn't a thing yet, working from home wasn't a thing yet.
Right.
So but they originally wanted me to move to the home office, which was in Boston, Massachusetts. And I was like, I don't want to. I just left. I don't want to go back there. And I said, well, let's just try this. And they're like, okay, let's try this for, 3 months. And then, 18 years later or whatever, I was still doing it. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when did you move to Venice Beach? I've heard you tell so many stories about living in Venice Beach and all that.
So there was a brief pit stop before Venice Beach.
Okay.
So I met my husband in, I don't remember what year it is now, maybe 2006.
Mm-hmm.
And his job, a little less than a year of being together, his job wound up getting bought out, and they were moving to Kansas City. And so they offered to move everybody for free, like to pay moving costs and whatever. And so we were kind of like, screw it, let's try it, let's see what it's about. And it didn't go very well. I mean, Kansas City actually is pretty cool. They have an amazing music culture there, and we were really into music. I had been in a band right before we left. Trav was in a band before we left, and so, but the one problem with it at the time was that the smoking ban hadn't happened yet in Kansas City, and we were both smokers. And I don't know if you guys remember what going to clubs were like, music clubs before the smoking ban happened, but it was pretty awful. It was pretty terrible for non-smokers. And so, that was sort of a deterrent for us to go to do this thing. And there was a bit of an art scene too, but at this point I was really focused on my graphic design and my science illustration career. That's like where all of my creative attention was going. I would do some painting here and there, like sporadically over the years, but it was never for extended periods of time. I never really had like a visual language at that point. I still didn't have like, sort of a direction. I was just going with whatever I felt like doing in the moment. And then of course I'd be like, happy birthday to like whatever friend, and give it to them, and not paint for like 2 years or something, but yeah, so Kansas City was garbage for us at the time. Maybe it would be different now, I don't know, but at the time I was, I was working from home, he was working in an office. It was just, yeah, it was pretty bad. So we weren't ready to move back to San Diego quite yet. And like before we left San Diego, we were always like, we don't want to ever live in LA. Ugh, the normal like stereotype that everybody thinks about LA. But we were sort of like, well, let's, try it. One of my best friends lived in Venice Beach at the time. And I was like, well, it's close enough to San Diego where we can go back and see friends, but we're still like having a new adventure. And so we wound up in Venice Beach, and it was pretty awesome. It was a slow roll. Like at first it wasn't awesome, but then we found our way, and it was pretty cool. I mean, I still wasn't really doing art at this point. When I was living in LA, I was still doing it very sporadically, or just doing, like creative projects. But one thing that I did wind up doing, when I was out there, we lived in this little craftsman house that was right on Venice Boulevard, right by Abbot Kinney, which is like one of the most popular shopping spots in LA now. And every like once a month on one of the Fridays or something, they would have like a first Friday kind of thing, and people would come from all over town and then like get wasted and roam the streets and stuff. And so we had this like gated front yard and this big porch, and I decided one day that I just wanted to have a gallery, like an outside gallery at the house. And I had like I knew nothing about the art community at that point. Like I knew nothing about having a gallery, or anything like that. But we built these structures that we attached to the fence that we could then hang clip lights onto, and then hang the work on those. And then we would bring out like couches and rugs and like kind of like a living room set up for everybody to hang out and have like wine and stuff. So, and we just asked like a few of our friends that were artists that I would just have like one artist each show. I think we had 4 shows total, and we sold work at every show. Like it was pretty crazy, and people just were walking by and would happen in, and we'd have live music and stuff. And it was just sort of like this slapdash, like DIY fuck it, let's do this kind of thing. And
did you have a name for what you were doing?
yeah, Linnea just said it right there. It's called
Porch
Porch Gallery. Yeah. Because we called the house the porch because we had this really big porch, and we just tons of people would hang out. We'd play music till like all hours of the night. And so it wasn't, oh, let's go over to Mel and Trav's, it was like, oh, let's go over to the porch, Yeah. So it's kind of sad driving by it now, though.
I think I've driven past it with you and you pointed it out, and it does face the street kind of, right? It faces up that very popular street.
That it's right next to Sparks, which is like a big art center. And across the street, it used to be, oh man, they built this beautiful gallery space. Like they had like Jenny Holzer there, and like, oh, they had so many people. And I knew nothing. Like I knew nothing at this point about art. Like even my art history background from college, like contemporary art wasn't really something that we were taught about. It was more like, Caravaggio and shit, which I love Caravaggio, like, or we would get up to like Picasso, and that's as far as, they would go. And it was no contemporary art kind of conversations. So there was this really, I think it was called like L&H maybe. It was built on the site of the Ray Bradbury's old house.
Right.
Yeah. And and so like,
I mean, Michael and I would go there a lot because Harmony Murphy was the curator there, and
Oh, really?
Yeah, there was a Louise Nevelson show there, and yeah, it was an incredible gallery, and it was on the site of Ray Bradbury's childhood home.
Yeah.
The beautiful brick building.
Just like popping across the street, like, I don't know. It was, I think in some respects, like doing that and going, because I wasn't really going to that many galleries or that many shows. That just wasn't where my socialness was at that point, or my headspace.
It's really weird hearing you say that, because I think we're getting closer up to date right now. I don't know where you want to go from here, but did you guys move to San Diego shortly after that, or?
Yeah, we moved back, I want to say 6 years ago, maybe.
So I just think of this moment where Michael and I would go to LA a lot for shows, and I remember we're walking to a gallery in LA. We're walking to Harmony Murphy Gallery, I think it was, when it was on 2nd and South Central.
Mm-hmm.
We're walking, and I'm with somebody else too, but Michael stopped and he was talking to you, and I'd never seen you before.
Yeah.
And you were just leaving the gallery or something. Mm-hmm. And I don't know who I was with, but Michael caught back up, and we were talking, and he was like, oh, that's Melissa Walters. She just, she's at every single show. She's at all these openings and stuff. And she came up for the show. Mm-hmm. And we continued to talk about that for a long time, because Michael and I would do the same thing. All the artists that I was hanging out with, there's just this hunger that all of a sudden hit us to see work and participate in going to shows and make sure that we were supporting people. And you were by yourself, mm-hmm. and you had come up from San Diego to see shows.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not hard for me because all my friends are still in LA, Mm-hmm. So it was basically like this like beautiful excuse, like, oh, go do this thing and then also see all my friends and like stay the night and, make it a thing. And so I've kind of gotten the habit of doing it. I haven't been up there in a while, and obviously not going there right now, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, when we moved back to San Diego, I had already made the decision that I was going to go back to my roots and get back into an art practice. Mm-hmm. And there was a whole bunch of reasons why we moved back to San Diego, but that was part of it for me. Like, I knew that was something that I wanted, but I knew in order to make that happen, I would need to kind of hermit myself away. I would need to come back and just like focus on that and just you know, start creating, you know, whether it's garbage or not, which obviously it was at first, you know. But I knew I couldn't do that in LA. Like I knew that, you know, I have so many of these people that I love out there. I knew myself. I knew that I wouldn't be able to just completely separate myself from them and take the time to focus on that. And so when the conversation about moving back to San Diego came up, I was like, yeah, I'm like, this is great, because I knew I could do that in San Diego. I'm like, there are plenty of people I still knew, but I wasn't involved in their lives as intensely anymore. So it was okay if I missed stuff. It was okay if I wasn't around, you know? Mm-hmm. And so, you know, but yeah, so like coming back to San Diego, it was very specific. And so when I started to do that, and I realized like, okay, and I started to get into an art practice, I started to really like, you know, dig out this visual language that I was trying to find. I realized, oh, I need to find what other people are doing, you know, like what else there, you know, where is everybody in San Diego? What are they doing? So I just hit the ground running, you know, and tried to go to everything as much as I could find. And like, you know, at first I didn't really know anybody. So I could go to 10 openings in a night without a problem, you know, and I would just start talking to people, and, you know, especially the artists that were shown, you know, in the shows, and being like, hey, how, you know, this is beautiful work. How are you, you know, like, what is your practice like? How, you know, just ask like a ton of questions. And, you know, I remember that's when I kind of met Michael. I think it might have been, I don't remember exactly, but it might have been when he did the string piece at Quint. Uh-huh. The piece at Quint. And so when I heard that he was having a piece up at Harmony's Gallery, I mean, I didn't know Harmony at the time, okay. But what was Harmony's gallery? What was that gallery called? I don't remember. It was
called Harmony Murphy Gallery.
Oh, well, yeah. And I remember there was another artist showing there, who's like, it was like the main show for this other artist, which was very confusing when I walked in.
Yeah.
And I remember kind of wandering around the show and looking at the show and being like, where's Michael's piece? Where's Michael's piece? You know? And then finally, I think I walked up to Harmony and was like, I heard that Michael James Armstrong had a piece, and she kind of led me over to it. And I'm like, oh, cool. You know, because, you know, I was in my mind after the Quint show, when he said he was doing another thread piece, I was thinking of something really, you know, like you walk in and there it is, you know. So it wound up being sort of in this beautiful little, you know, quiet alcove that you could see from the street, which was even better, you know. Yeah. But I remember coming out of that and not expecting to see you guys at all, you know. But yeah, yeah,
it shows how good of a friend. I didn't even remember that we were going to see Michael's show. I just got a message. I got a message that I am not clear. Am I clear right now, or am I blurry?
Your face is blurry. Your face is blurry, weird. But your voice is. Oh.
I just took my Wi-Fi off.
Oh.
I just wanted to see if that would help.
Okay. There you go.
Is that clear? Okay.
Yeah.
Not that anybody wants to see my face, but I just want to make sure it's not a total wasted effort to try and do these videos. But yeah, not, you know, I guess shortly after that, I started seeing you around San Diego, and you had applied for the residency program at Bread and Salt.
Yeah. Why did you guys accept me? It was because of that day, wasn't it?
It was because, what are you saying? You think it was because I met you that day?
Uh-huh. Because I was in LA that day?
Well, I don't know. I didn't even talk to you then. It was just this kind of moment where we had all been seeing you around. And that's the kind of thing, you know, especially like when we get applications from people that live in San Diego that have never been to Bread and Salt, that happens. That's actually a real thing, you know. We want to make sure that people are, you know, coming to shows and they're active in the arts community. Not that everybody has to be a social butterfly. I certainly am not that. And yeah. I know you know, it just means that you're an active participant in the arts, and you know, so seeing people around definitely helps in how we pick people. But
Yeah.
it also was because we saw what you were doing. There was a lot of stuff that you'd been doing. I think you did a piece at the airport around that time, or
Yep.
so it was also, you know, just seeing what was happening. But
That's cool.
and it definitely helps to have a little bit of chatter in the background of people, you know, saying an artist's name and somebody needing a space. And I know that you were working from home. You were living in South Park at the time, but you know, every artist needs a decent space to work, and that's something that's really neat about the program at Bread and Salt, is that you get a large studio. It's, you know,
yeah,
it's over 1,000 square feet. I think it's a big space.
Yeah, it's really big.
I don't know if you want to start there, or what. Is there anything else that we're missing in this kind of timeline of that stuff?
Oh, you want me to talk about Bread and Salt?
You don't have to talk about Bread and Salt. I mean, we are hosting Bread and Salt.
Well,
Hosting this video.
I would like to, before I get to Bread and Salt, I would like to mention, especially because, like, for other artists, I get kind of this question a lot about, you know, how to find spaces to show work, and, you know, how do you get your work shown in spaces, and my very first like art show, solo art show, I wound up having at my friend Ryan's tattoo space called the Vishita Creatives in South Park. And he has, I mean, like, tattoo shops now are not what they used to be. I mean, some of these artists are creating such beautifully curated spaces, and he is one of those. He has lots of art and oddities, and he was doing a lot of art shows at the time in the space too. And so I just bought him a beer, and I was like, hey, would you mind if I had an art show at your space? And he's like, yeah, sure. like really? Yeah. And I think that show in particular was a really wonderful jumping off point, because I wound up selling quite a lot in that show. And I think that experience really sort of motivated me to keep moving forward and to keep evolving, and to not be fearful of asking for stuff. I mean, it gets harder and harder the more you kind of move throughout the community and evolve your work. But I think that was sort of like, that gave me the confidence to keep moving, and then ask Alejandra Frank over at Taros Gallery if she would be willing to show my work over there, and then have the confidence to apply to the Bread and Salt, to you guys, for the Bread and Salt residency,
It's so important to collect work at all different levels. You know, what you're talking about is this, like, this feeling of validation in what you do, and it can be so easy to help an artist out. You know, so many times some of the work can be, so affordable if we're talking about supporting a new artist that's got great stuff. It's a small gesture. I mean, sometimes it can be really hard, but a lot of times people can take payments and things like that, and it's not always about big time collectors, but that moment of validation in what you do can just, it can just be a massive burst of energy to an artist to continue making work. I've had so many friends that have stopped working as an artist because the struggle is so real, and paying rent and all that kind of stuff. They are just faced with stopping, but who knows what they could have been or what they could have done, or the financial aspect of working as a professional artist is it's a real thing.
The starving artist trope comes from somewhere, I mean, even when I told my dad that I was going to kind of take a step back from my full-time gig. You know, I told my folks that I was going to take a step back from my full-time gig. My mom was, you know, very supportive, and she thought that was great. And my dad was like, what, are you going to be a starving artist? You know? And, you know, I mean, it's hard. If I was on my own, you know, if I didn't have a supportive partner and I didn't have a career before this where I was able to save quite a bit of money, then I honestly wouldn't be able to do the amount of work, produce and show as much as I've been doing that, you know, because it just wouldn't have been realistic. It's, you know, selling art is hard, you know, it's a very difficult business. And the hard part of it too is that we're gonna make it if we don't sell it, you know, so it's sort of, you know, like having to figure out how to navigate that. But, you know, there are people that have been very supportive of me throughout, you know, career as an artist so far. And I appreciate every single one of those folks, but it's, you know, it's an ongoing kind of battle, you know?
Yeah, and you're one of those artists that's lucky. You do works on paper, and you're, you know, the way that you do large. Sorry, what?
I said for now, I'm doing works on paper.
Right. No, I just mean that you are able to do large scale installations, and then you also just happen to have this, you know, tool bag that you can do works on paper at the moment, and, you know, sell that stuff too. So, what was that like, and what were some of those first installations that you worked on that were kind of informative?
I think the very first installation I did was at Taros Gallery, and that wound up going into a couple different places. That wound up going to the airport, though temporarily. It wound up not being very conducive to a non-guarded space. It was a string piece, so children would go into that space, kind of get their hands in it, and so it needed to be repaired kind of a number of times. But like going through that process was, I mean, doing any kind of installation. I think every single thing I've ever done, you know, really everything is a learning process, especially the installation, because you're constantly like, we're not, I mean, I think in general artists aren't the kind of folks that like, okay, I just learned a skill, now I'm just going to do that thing only forever, you know? Like most of the time we learn a skill to make a thing, and then we think of a new idea, and now we need to learn a totally new skill, you know? And it's this constant like battle of like learning and then relearning, or like, you know, or just finding something completely new. And so I'm constantly feeling like I'm treading up, you know, treading downstream or upstream, or whichever the hard part one is, you know, treading upstream, you know, trying to like just let my skill catch up with my ideas, you know, because those don't usually go hand in hand. I'm not a very skillful person, unfortunately.
When did all the skill in doing science-based illustrations for the NASA projects and things, when did that start informing your work, or had that been happening for a while? When did you start that dialogue where it was a direct kind of dialogue that you were having with these scientists?
So that sort of happened when I was creating the work for the Taros show. Before that, when I did the show at Vishuda Creatives, I was doing these small works on paper of abstracted shapes, you know, geometric imagery. They were very illustrative. They really had it was just, you know, figuring out how to use line and shading. There was really no conceptual ideas behind the work at all. In fact, Travis named every single piece for me. Like I didn't even name the work. But then when I started doing the larger works on paper that were kind of a continuation of these geometric images, I started to, because I'm working in an abstracted way, I started to sort of make these weird connections with these, you know, celestial objects that I had been working with for years.
Mm-hmm.
And it was sort of ironic to me in some respect, because when I stepped back from my job with NASA, I kind of thought I was going to leave that stuff like behind me. You know, I always felt a little bit like a fraud in that field, because I wasn't, you know, I came from an art background, not from a science background. I never really, you know, I don't think I ever really took like ownership. Of course, I learned the information, but I was like going from project to project. I wasn't really like retaining it necessarily, or really diving into topics, you know, just enough to do the job, you know, to get that job done and then on. But so when I started to do these large geometric abstractions, and like, I'm like, oh, this kind of is reminding me of a neutron star. And I was like, oh, I'm like, that's kind of cool. And then I'm like, you know, thinking about what I did know about a neutron star, and being surprised that I knew as much as I did, because I didn't really think I was like holding this information, you know? And then I would start pushing these works like further to make more connections for me in particular to these objects. And then I just kind of kept running with it, because I realized it was a really beautiful well to dip into for inspiration, because there are these really sort of like mysterious and complicated and almost philosophical ideas that come out of astronomy. And yeah, so I kind of just kept going, you know, and I don't know if that'll be forever, you know, and I think some of my work is starting to shift a little bit more into sort of connections with astronomy, but also thinking about philosophy and morality, and how those things all kind of combined at times. So yeah, so that's kind of where all that. Did I answer your question? I don't even. Do you remember what your question was?
No, but you know, I think of this moment where you did I'm going to talk about Bread and Salt, the gravitational lensing piece that you did at Bread and Salt. I felt like that was this big moment for you. But I mean, what did you think of what was happening at that moment?
Well, you know, walking into Bread and Salt was really intimidating experience, but I knew even before going in there, I wanted to try to do something big. You know, I hadn't really done big. I mean, my one installation with Teros was kind of like the biggest I had gone at that point, but and I, you know, and I knew that I still needed to work with accessible materials to me, and I had been working with paper at that point so much that I just sort of kept going down that path. And I don't know, like, I really, you know, I think that piece in particular, the gravitational lensing piece, I think it was born partially from what I was thinking about before I entered the residency itself, but then kind of evolved with the residency, especially like technique and figuring out materials and how to work the materials. And part of that was just being exposed to other people, and finally, you know, like working in a space that people were coming into and interacting with, because at that point there was no door to that residency space. It was open to the gallery. So if the gallery was open, then anybody could come into that space for good or ill. But most of the time it was awesome, because, you know, I would just have constant flow of artists and creatives and people interested in the arts coming in and talking to me about what I'm doing, and I would ask questions, and I really built like a lot of good relationships through that time. You know, I got close with you and Michael, and then Daniel too, Daniel Morales. Like, you know, it was sort of like a really it was a really fruitful time for me, you know, because my world was opening up more, you know, especially you are so like knowledgeable about contemporary art, and my knowledge at that point was really not strong at all. And you were like this patient, you know, sensei at the time, just like oh, this reminds me of this work. Oh, you should look at this. You should look at that. I'm like, I will. Okay.
Well,
You know?
I think we also went to an Agnes Martin show at the time. Did we go to that together?
No,
Did we all go?
I didn't go with you. I went on my own though.
Oh, really? I thought we all went to LA together. I'm totally wrong though.
We did go to LA, but it wasn't for the Agnes Martin show. I don't remember what it was for. I went up there a bunch, but yeah. But
are there artists now that you've kind of? Are there artists now that that you're interested in? Like, I feel like Agnes Martin must be an influence of yours.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, you guys went to that show, and then I wound up going to LA, and Michael told me to go see that show, and I like went in and I walked into the Agnes Martin show and was like immediately like jaw on the floor, you know, like blown away by her work, and just like, I don't know, just every room, every piece, like my heart was just in my throat basically for that whole show. And it had been a really long time since I had that sort of reaction to work, you know, and I that there was a lot of that did wind up, a lot of her work, if people don't know what it's about, you know, what her work looks like, it's very quiet. Her work is beautifully quiet, but it's very it's meticulous in the sense of measurement, you know, and line. And so she's usually using very like quiet palettes, very pale, you know. But there was just, you know, it was something in that idea of simplicity, which, you know, this work is never simple, you know, a lot of that, and that's what happens in my work too. Like I worry about like, sometimes when people look at my work, like people have said, oh, I could do that. And I'm like, no, you probably can't. Like, it looks like it's easy, but that shit ain't easy.
Yeah.
But, you know, and so her for sure was something, you know, her work for sure was something that I was really into. But lately, you know, I'm kind of moving in like a little bit of newer directions for me. And I'm looking more towards painters at the moment. And in particular, there's a painter, Robert Ryman, who I'm really appreciating, but then I'm also looking at Franz Klein and Cy Twombly. And like, I think I'm getting to this place where the word meticulous with my work might not be associated anymore. And I'm sort of moving in this like new direction. But at Bread and Salt though, like that was sort of became my focus of having sort of how to use materials in a seemingly simple way with still have these sort of like beautiful gestures and very much like interactive work, you know. I think Michael yesterday in his talk was talking about how he really likes when you have to engage in the work and you have to move throughout the work. And I think maybe that's his influence somewhere in there wound up in mine, because I feel the same way. Like I do these pieces. I just posted something the other day, like, why do I even bother posting this stuff? It just looks like a white paint, you know, like a white piece of paper that's been framed. And I think it's because like I like creating this work that's so delicate that it forces people to approach it and get really intimate with it. And I think that sort of those ideas really started to germinate and grow during the Bread and Salt residency. You know, I really started to step away from this like illustrative style that I had been doing previously of those geometric forms, and like really breaking down color too at that time, and getting really like I don't know, it's simple. I hate that word, but you know, with my palettes was during Bread and Salt.
A really great installation that you ended up doing after that was at the 1805 residency in Little Italy. You did this really, you know, really, I don't know how to describe it, but it was viewable from the street, and you did let people in there at times, but it was something that...
Just at the end.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, thanks to you mainly for that happening, because you really helped me make that happen. I remember when I came up with the idea of what I wanted to do for that installation, and that installation was made up of black thread, that went into a wall from different points in a room. And when I first had the idea for it, I remember going to Put and Salt and talking to you, because like I said, my skill level is still pretty nil, but talking to you about it, I was like, okay, this is my idea. Like, do you think I could do it? And you're like, well, how are you going to do it? And I explained to you how I was going to do it. And you're like, yeah, that's not going to work. And I'm like, oh, how do I make it work? And you're like, you need to build a wall. I'm like, how do you build a wall, Tom?
You know, that's like, something I feel like in the arts community, we all, just like Michael and I were talking about yesterday, that's how we did Ice Gallery. It was like all or nothing. We're all in it together as, you know, this larger arts community to make it happen. And I help artists all the time. And I know you have, you know, putting in the hours and hours and hours to help individual do a work, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you've helped me, Andrew's helped me, Michael, Daniel, you know, my friend Catalina, like just kinds of people have come. And
or even
the Ice Gallery piece, you know, beyond, I got even more help with that work.
Right, I know you did a public call for help, and you know, even professionals, even at the museum level, they'll ask for the public's help to realize a large work. You know, sometimes you just have to ask the extended public, you know,
yeah.
give us a hand here doing this minutia. You know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's, you know, and I think it's just incredible that, you know, that anybody is willing to help me let the crazy out, you know, like basically, you know, we have these ideas, and you know, like I said before, a lot of times my ideas don't match my skill levels or don't match like my ability. Like I do not have the ability to make, you know, 3,000 plus, you know, paper pyramids on my own, you know, within a reasonable amount of time. Like I do not have, or, you know, like I also learned at the Ice Gallery show that I am very scared of heights after a certain height. Like, and so, you know, like calling, you know, the fact that anybody comes and helps and is willing to like be part of that process is just beautiful to me. You know, I'm not really one to do like a, you know, kind of a not social practice, but like community-based work. Like I prefer to work more on my own in like a solitary space, but you know, anything for the baby, I guess, you know, like you gotta do what you gotta do in order to make these ideas come to life, you know, sometimes.
I know you've done a couple talks with some scientists that you have. Are there people that you're still talking with just on a science level, just for conversation? Are you in contact with people?
Not as much, unfortunately. Yeah, the science conversations aren't as often. I did do a talk with Lisa Will, who works at the Fleet Science Center and does a lot of the planetarium like presentations and stuff, and does a lot of science outreach over there. And she invited me to do this talk that they do with scientists at it's called Astronomy on Tap. So they'll have two scientists come in and do a talk at a brewery or whatever. And so it was the Chandra, the mission that I work with. It was the 20th anniversary, 20-year anniversary recently, and so she invited me to do a talk as well for that. So, and it was really interesting because they had another scientist, I unfortunately can't remember what his name was, do a talk as well, and he went before me, which was very intimidating because, like, honestly, like when scientists get together, like real scientists get together and talk, that shit is very hard to understand. Very, very hard to understand. I am still, you know, even though I'm into that kind of topic and information,